Hello and welcome to today's Innovation Forum webinar on food, fashion and farmers, finding common ground on regenerative agriculture. My name is Ellen Natia and I will be moderating today's session. Today we'll be exploring how regenerative agriculture is being defined across different industries, the challenges that farmers are facing today, and how food and fashion brands can work together to scale these regenerative practices. I'm thrilled to be joined by a fantastic panel. We've got Jeffrey Fitzpatrick, Director of Sustainability at Canada Goose, formerly Mars and McDonald's, Cannon Michaels, President of Bowles Farm and Company, Luke McKelvey, Senior Manager of Farm Level Resiliency at McDonald's for Global Sustainable Food Sourcing, and finally Gisette Lewis, VP and Chief Scientific Officer at the Almond Board of California. Welcome to you all. I'll be turning to the panel very shortly, but in the meantime, audience, we'd love to hear from you. Please do engage with the Zoom Q&A function. You can upvote questions as well. The ones that are most popular will get priority, and please do aim to leave your name and organisation when leaving a question. This session is also being recorded, and we'll share the recording afterwards, so you can share that as well with your colleagues. Okay, firstly, let's start by understanding what regenerative agriculture really means across different perspectives. I think we should definitely be turning to Cannon first. How do you define regen ag on your farm, Cannon?
Well, it's a great question. And first of all, thanks for having me on the panel. It's great to be with a great group of other leaders in the industry. I think the definition is something that's challenging because it's really place-based. I think for us, just very specifically at our farm, it's been something about how do we care for not only the soil and the amazing biodiversity that we have around us, but how do we build up our soils to be resilient in the face of climate. It's been something we've been doing for a long period of time here at our farm. We've been farming the same land for over 160 years. So, I think there's core pillars in regenerative that people have sort of aligned on, which would be improving soil health, increasing biodiversity, carbon sequestration, livestock integration, and the one I think people sometimes tend to forget is increasing community well-being and supporting farmers and the people that work for them. So it's part of the challenge, I think, which you see on the barriers there. So it's a little bit hard to kind of put the pin in exactly everybody's definition, and because agriculture is very different in different places in terms of being some areas being rain-fed and some being monoculture, some being like ours, where we have very diverse rotations and a lot of different, the Mediterranean climate that's one of the few in the world here in California. So, it's a challenge on the definition, but I think at the base core, it's about, preserving farming into the future. Each farmer is going to approach it a little bit differently. But I think the core pillars I defined sort of are like a framework, but it's a little unclear, which I think makes it a big challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a need for clarity there on the principles. Thanks for sort of setting the scene there, Cannon. I'm intrigued to see if the principles that you've outlined there are the same across industries. So perhaps, Luke, if we could turn to you, do you see the principles being the same within the food sector?
Yeah, generally, Cannon's right. I think a lot of the original sort of enthusiast or evangelist for regenerative agriculture sort of eschewed a strict definition because it is so contextual and place-based. So we don't abide by necessarily a strict bespoke definition within McDonald's, but rather we tend to revolve our activity and our just our approach around six generally aligned on principles, and some of them touch on the same things that Cannon did. It's keeping the soil covered, minimizing soil disturbance to the degree, highest degree possible, increasing biodiversity as an action, and certainly as an outcome, maintaining living root, integrating livestock into systems where possible, and then minimizing external inputs. And a lot of organizations include context as a seventh principle, and certainly it's incredibly important, as Cannon alluded to. But really, it's important to McDonald's simply because everything we serve in our restaurants to our great customers starts on a farm or ranch. Whether that's beef or chicken, buns or lettuce, and so our business is intrinsically tied to a thriving food system. So we believe in the potential and the promise of regenerative ag, and that it's really crucial to the longevity of a food system that supports outcomes to farm and farmer viability, farmer well-being, ecosystem health, and as Cannon mentioned, the rural communities that support agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, I think really key point there is the fact that it's evolving, it's ever changing at the moment, and context is such a big factor. Gisette, how is it for the almond board of California? Are there similarities there or any differences that you'd like to make us aware of?
Yeah, well, I would fully agree with Cannon's principles. Those are, I think, the core of how we would look at regenerative ag. To take those principles into how do we actually implement regenerative ag in the almond industry. So what's maybe unique for some viewers is we're a perennial crop. We are not something you plant every year. So no-till is the most common situation for growing almonds. Once you plant an orchard, it's there for 25 years and there's no tilling in between. So that's easy to accomplish. One of the unique techniques that I would throw into regenerative ag is something called whole orchard recycling. So at the end of a life of an orchard, about 25 years after the trees are no longer very productive, we developed a technique where you can take 100% of the orchard biomass, so push over the trees, grind them up into very large wood chips, not the kind you put in your backyard, and those get placed under the soil. So all of that carbon, somewhere between 50 to 60 tons of wood, are put into the soil. And what we found from research is that sequesters 2.5 tons of carbon per hectare. It improves the water holding capacity and the water use efficiency of anything you plant afterwards. And it improves the yield of the next orchard or the next crop that you plant. So it's really a win-win. The grower gets a benefit, the environment gets a benefit. All those wood chips are great for improving soil quality. There's really no practice in agriculture that puts that much biomass into organic matter into the soil at one time. But to get to the community piece, what has driven large-scale adoption of this practice in our industry is that you can no longer burn an orchard at the end of the life. So what to do with that orchard? This becomes really the only alternative. So the communities around benefit in terms of air quality improvements, but to keep those farms part of the community, fortunately, our state has provided incentives to help cover some of the cost. It's extremely expensive to bring in heavy-duty equipment to push over an orchard, to make it into wood chips, and to put it into the soil. So the cost of that is really prohibitive for most growers to afford on their own. And that's where the state has come in to help offset some of that cost to achieve both those environmental and those community benefits in terms of air quality and in terms of the viability of farms in this region. So I think that's an example of a practice that touches upon all of those. Cover crops, the living roots, we've done a lot of research to show that that living roots is really critical to stimulating the soil microbial diversity and the benefits that delivers in terms of nutrient cycling and so forth. And in our industry, that's also a great way to support pollinators, both the honeybees that we bring in to pollinate almond crops, because they cannot pollinate themselves naturally, but also to native bees. And we've had some great success in encouraging growers to add hedgerows and other types of habitat outside the orchard on top of cover crops to really amplify those biodiversity benefits for pollinators.
Thanks, Gisette. Some really great examples there of looking at it holistically and sort of tying it back into the human community aspect that Cannon mentioned at the beginning. Jeff, really intrigued to get your thoughts here. You've obviously worked in both fashion and food. Do you see any sort of key differences there in how regen ag is approached across the industries in your experience?
No, I mean, all of the priorities or key things that everyone's mentioned are, I think, universal across all industries. I think we know soil health is so important because it adds all the things that Josette was talking about, and Cannon and Luke, that it's adding all of the support for the soil to do then whatever you are going to do with it. It's storing carbon. I think one of the things, probably all of us, but I think the fashion industry has been looking, when we think about regenerative agriculture as kind of a topic, is moving, when I think about regenerative agriculture and what's different than just like good farming practices and things like that, is moving away from the idea of minimizing the harm that you're causing with your supply chain to really now focusing on how you're enhancing and restoring. To me, that's kind of what regenerative, and it covers all those things. You're enhancing and restoring communities, landscapes, those things. And the last thing I'd say is I think always the number one fundamental principle for agriculture and any commodity where you're dealing with farmers and producers has got to be economic sustainability first, because we can't have any of the other things, the biodiversity, the community, the soil, we can't have anything else if farmers can't make money doing this, and they're feeding and clothing us. And so in my view, every regenerative policy needs to start with that as the focus. And if you don't have that figured out and that isn't your priority at all times, the other things are going to fall away because it won't make sense for the farmer to do it. So yeah, I would say that.
Thanks, Jeff. Reminders to the audience, please do submit your questions through the Q&A. We'll be turning to them in just a moment. So Jeff mentioned there about now turning to looking at enhancing and restoring. I feel like this would be a good point to talk about what success actually looks like. So Cannon, what does success on a working farm in regen ag look like for you?
Well, it's an interesting question, because I mean, I think in some ways people think about regenerative as being this very new thing, and I'm always excited when people are excited about agriculture. But like I mentioned briefly, we've been farming, the same land for over 160 years, and I think in some ways people would almost want us to have done nothing to improve our soil, and so that they could have a benchmark to say, Bulls farming can improve like 50% better, but we've been iterating and trying to, make the most out of our soil. The key pillars to us have always been our soil has to be healthy, our people have to be healthy, the community around us has to be healthy, the environment that we farm in this really unique ecosystem around us. These are things that are not new to us, but I think, people have, like, this light bulb went on about regenerative. And I'm not saying there aren't areas where, farming has been degraded, and we are always looking to improve. But, I think success for us is having the resilience in our soil, is having happy people working on the farm, healthy people working on the farm, having this amazing diversity of environment around us, having our communities locally be healthy. So, these are things that aren't really new to our farm, and something that we care, very deeply about. So I think, it's great to have the focus, and I think it's great to have the attention. Anything that brings more eyes to, farmers and wants to find ways to reward us, I think is fantastic. Our farm has some organic certified land that we farm. We also are 100% Regen Agri certified. But I would say until Regen can unlock a customer that wants to pay extra for regenerative, I think it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. Organic has found a way to carve out, premiums in a lot of their markets. Those have eroded a little bit recently in some ways, but I think you still have identified a consumer that matters to. So I'm hoping that continues with regenerative, and I think that's going to take us forward in the future, is to find those customers. But I think it starts with partnerships with brands that want to tell those stories. But to me, there's a lot of really positive stories that are out there. We can always do better. We're always pushing ourselves to do better. But regenerative to me is not some light bulb moment. It was something we sort of had a core of our family and kind of the way that we approach farming.
Yeah, really interesting point about the sort of premium for consumers comparing it to organic. Definitely want to come back to that. Just, you mentioned some of the sort of principles, so sort of community, biodiversity, soil resiliency. Are those measurable the same way across different commodities on the farm? Or do you see, is that ever a challenge working with different crops?
Yeah, it's very much a challenge being a food producer and, a fiber producer, which we are. We are farming like 20 different crops. Some of them are direct to market food crops, which hamstrings us in a lot of ways. It's a challenge because one of the pillars of biodiversity actually flies in the face of food safety. So we have a number of audits where if we're going to deliver a watermelon or a tomato directly to a consumer, if the auditor comes and sees birds in the field, sees a coyote run through the field, we actually will be punished, or that can be segregated from being able to be used, that food. And then also with animal integration, it presents huge challenges because we cannot have animals on fields that are going to be used for food production. They can't even be in the vicinity sometimes, depending on the crop. So we have, a lot of challenges that way. I think again that's why very challenging with the definition of people just have a very firm idea in their mind that you have to put animals in the field. That's going to be a challenge, or use manure. Those things can be a real challenge. So for us, it's very, very complicated. And also, I hear the living root thing, and I knew that, like Kiss the Ground and some of these documentaries romanticized, the cover crops and the living roots. And living roots have to be part of our soil, but we often don't have time rotationally to even plant a cover crop. And because of the dynamic rotation that we have, we often, just are, there's only a month or so when the soil isn't with a crop. And so that's another issue. And then just even the rainfall that we get annually here in California, sometimes we won't get enough over the winter to really produce a healthy cover crop. Which is why we've turned more to compost in a partnership with the state of California, where we're taking green waste that would have gone to a landfill, composting it here on the farm and putting it into the soil. So we're putting the organic matter in at the times that we have it available and have the field available. But anyway, I don't want to go on too long. I know we've got other people, but it's I'll just try to highlight the complexity, so I apologize.
No, don't apologize. Definitely complex, as you say, and lots to come back to. I'm intrigued to see how it's working sort of in practice for the others implementing these principles into supply chains. Luke, perhaps you'd like to share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's just what a privilege just to hear, Cannon and Josette give a frontline kind of a frontline perspective of the complexities that we know exist, and that we are empathetic to, and so it's just incredible. First of all, it's just incredibly helpful to hear them speak first person to the challenges and the rewards for that. In McDonald's, we draw from so many different food categories. It's not just beef and chicken, but it's wheat for buns, and tomatoes and lettuce and potatoes. And so, we do try to the best of the ability to, apply, principles as context allows. And to the point that Cannon just made, there's food safety issues around introducing livestock in certain contexts. So, we're sensitive to that. And we do try to take a look of it at regenerative adoption in almost an incremental way, because we want progress over perfection. I mean, we live that mantra out every day, within our supply chain, within our system. And so we certainly want to recognize efforts along the way, and we don't want to have too strict of a definition. So, I think to your earlier question, Ellen, what does success look like? I mean, for an organization like ours, it's really the long-term success of a thriving food system that can provide affordable and accessible nutrition to everyone. I mean, affordability is a cornerstone of McDonald's as an organization, of our value to our consumers. And so, if food becomes so difficult, driven or difficult to produce from climate impacts or other dynamics, it's going to become just more and more expensive. And so, we see regenerative agriculture as really a pathway and an enabler to keeping the food system healthy and thriving, and that includes farmers and ranchers and producers and growers doing what they do best and doing what they love. And so it's extremely important for us as we want to lean into a thriving food system in the decades to come.
Absolutely, and as you say, progress over perfection. I feel like that could be the mantra for sustainability in general. Josette, how is it looking within your sort of supply chains? Are there any sort of exciting innovations that have come about when looking at regenerative agricultural principles?
Yeah, well, we've had, we are a nonprofit funded by all almond growers. It's kind of sits in the side of the supply chain, but we do engage with all of the players in the supply chain, the growers, the processors who are within our industry that sell on to food brands and retailers. And where we've really, for us, success is um, when we see increased adoption of practices that have benefits, whether they're economic benefits to the grower or environmental benefits or regulatory benefits, helping them adapt to farming in California. As Cannon knows well, we have to farm to some of the highest standards in the world because we have a lot of regulations on every single aspect of farming here. So for us, success is monitoring and measuring increased adoption of these practices, which we have a platform that allows us to do in the almond industry. Where we've really seen success take off is when we have a combination of science, so research that shows what the benefits or in some cases the trade-offs are for growers or for the environment. In our industry, we have a long history of funding research. It gives credibility not only to the consumer and the marketplace of any claims that we make, but it also gives credibility to growers. They care, they want to know that this is based on some objective information and based on trials that have been done in multiple locations over multiple years, so that that helps de-risk some of the practice adoption from that for them, is to have that scientific base. So that's a key. And we've seen supply chain partners work with us on the research side. We have a stacked regenerative ag project right now where on multiple locations, we're looking at if you do multiple regenerative practices from whole orchard recycling to biochar to annual compost to annual cover cropping, does that ladder up to some synergistic benefits over time? And we've had supply chain partners help fund some of that research. So that's been a great collaboration there. If I take some regenerative practices like cover cropping and adding hedgerows for pollinator benefits, we saw a situation where we got a fourfold increase in cover crop planting in just 3 years. So about 20% of almond orchards now have cover crops that they plant. That rapid adoption was driven by the combination of some good science, the combination of having really good partners who could work on the ground with growers, who could show up, show them what kind of seed mixes work in almonds. But the real power was when our processors got involved. And we had cases where some of them were paying growers extra for certifying as a bee-friendly farm, for example, which often requires a cover crop, a hedgerow, and some pest management practices to reduce risks to pollinators from pesticide use. So in that case, when those processors got engaged, because they want to differentiate themselves in the marketplace, some of them want to sell to buyers who were really leaning in on pollinator practices as one of their corporate goals. So they decided to incentivize growers. Whether they were getting paid by their buyer, I don't know, in the food industry, but that really drove rapid adoption and is a great example of how different players in the system can align.
Yeah, great to hear some successful stories there from collaboration, which is definitely something we'll come on to. Jeff, how's it looking within the fashion industry? I can only imagine how complex the supply chains are, but how are you
It's
aiming to
super
embed?
simple. It's super simple.
Yeah, can do it with your eyes closed.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, we've got it solved. I think as I was listening to my colleagues here speak, I was thinking one of the things that is unique, part of what we're talking about here is the food industry and the fashion industry should be finding ways to work more collaboratively together. But as Luke was going through, McDonald's, whatever it is, it's apples, tomatoes, wheat, the whole thing, all this stuff. This is why the food industry, in my view, is ahead of the curve in these things because they've had to be focused on this stuff in a different way. In fashion industry, we have natural fibers, we have cotton, wool, down, but we have a whole range of synthetic fibers, and we're having to deal with chemical use issues and, restricted chemical lists and dealing with our suppliers on those types of things. We have a lot of recycled fibers. So we're dealing with what are the supply chains and the economics of collecting those fibers and recycling them. So our attention is split across different things, and fashion can't give the same amount of attention to the farming practices because we have so many different things to think about. And then I think, as I'm also thinking, Josette was making some really good points just about, the science and measurement and stuff. And that's also something that we are struggling with, and in a sense has almost got ahead of us before we can kind of devote attention and working together on the practices. We're like, oh, how do we monitor it? How do we verify it? How do we know the science is right? And here's a news flash for everybody. Science is messy. And what was scientifically right 10 years ago, we've learned more and we know it's not now. But by the time you invest and figure out the system to have the previous science implemented, everyone's saying it's changed and it's different now and we have to do things. And that's also the stuff that really keeps, I think, tripping up producers is they get all these, signals, and people are like, you've got to deliver signals. And I feel like, end users, McDonald's is a perfect example of one that gets very clear signals about things that they want to see in their supply chain. But then things change and they're adapting as they should to the changing thing. But before, the farmers have got to figure out, wait, I thought cover crops was the thing you wanted me to do. Now it's rotation. Now it's this. Now it's soil carbon capture and measurement because you want to pay me for a carbon credit. But wait, before I do that, we've decided it's landscape level change that's more important than individual stuff. So it's very difficult. And these are the things I'm hoping that we can, kind of start these dialogues and have the therapy session of this stuff through it, and then start being like, how do we solutions orient around these things? How do we work through them, have that traceability, get those verification components that the brands have to have for not just consumers, right? It's regulators, policymakers, everybody else, shareholders. And so I think too, when we look at one group that we don't have on this call, and it's because you can't have everybody or no one get a chance to do it, but Josette mentioned the processors, right? There are that critical component right in the middle that is the one that deals with the up and down from them. They are that linchpin. And when McDonald's cannot go, even if they wanted to, and pay all the individual producers a premium for doing the good work that they want. It's got to flow through the value chain that exists today, and it's the same for all of us. So those processors, the suppliers, have to figure out how that nexus works. And then just like in Canon's operation, there are a lot of suppliers that are dealing with multiple things too. McDonald's has a lot of suppliers that are providing multiple commodities to them, from oil seeds, crops, and proteins. And there's different incentive structures, some are more vertically integrated. So there's a lot of pressure on them as well. And I spent the last week before this conference touring suppliers here, and you can feel it the same way you feel in food. These textile producers, finished goods producers are just under so much pressure for solutions and figuring it all out. So I'm hoping that, this is a catalyst for us to start working together and coming together to make, Canon's life easier. And, that kind of is, I chuckled when, the 160 years, because when I first started 20 years ago going to farms and you would say sustainability, and the first thing that people would say was, well, I'm still here, so I guess I'm sustainable. What more do you want from me? And then it's a more nuanced conversation now, but that is still the final thing. Canon is still there, but our role is to make sure that it's another 160 years and Bowls can still be in operation.
Thanks, Jeff. I did have another question, but Luke, did you want to come in there? I saw you unmuted yourself.
Oh, is this just about the connection between food and fashion, Ellen? Sorry. I know we've gone down a few different rabbit holes, so go ahead and reframe our next conversation point. They've touched on some great things.
Absolutely, there's so much to unpack. I mean, one of the things I wanted to just bring us back to is what Jeff mentioned there about how we could, there is a need for knowledge sharing, and the fact that it is ever growing all the time. People are risking being left behind. There's just a need for shared tools and knowledge. How do you think that could look, Jeff? In what capacity do you think that could work?
I think it's different segments of the value chain working together in different ways. And I mean, Cannon's got a perfect example. It was a mixed producer that sees different commodities and that stuff. But having, it's the other thing I always want people to, and Cannon mentioned this too, about like trying to tell the story. I I really feel like, I mean, if producers are, you know, in want to tell their story, please do. But I feel like that's an extra burden we're putting on them to do everything else that we want, all of the practices, all of the measurement, all of the validation for us, give us all the data, do all stuff. Oh, and by the way, in your spare time, could you also make sure that millions of people understand your positive story? That's where Canada Goose, the McDonald's, in my opinion, we're the ones that have marketing budgets. We're the ones that have brand, experts that understand how to connect with consumers. And, Luke and I have struggled for a long time. It is difficult to get our marketing departments to figure out a way to talk about soil health that's fun and sexy and interesting. But we do have to figure some of those things out because I don't think the burden should be on producers to tell their story. I'd rather they were focused on all of the things that we need to get done. And I had an example yesterday where there was a sheep farmer and she was doing kind of a side presentation. I was so interested, of course, because I'm at a textile conference. I was like, animal producer, I'll be right there. And it was awesome. And she was talking about all the things they're doing. She talked about how, when her dad took over, there were 20 paddocks that they had. Now they have 140 because they're doing the rotation. Soil health. I'm asking her about genetics and how they're focusing on breeding things and, trying to bring all the beef industry questions to her and see how it is in the sheep industry. And she was talking about all this great stuff. And in the end, someone asked her, like, how's it going? And then she was like, well, last year, because there was a drought and commodity prices, it cost them $26 a kilo to make wool, and they sold it for 19. So that's my original point. Like, that's not sustainable. So she's doing everything we're asking for her as a wool producer. She's doing all the stuff. She's measuring. They're certified. They've done literally everything they can do. But those two things, nature and economics, means it's not working for her. So she's like, we can do it for 1 year, we can't keep doing it that way. So we have to work together as that whole industry to figure out how we solve that problem as well.
And I'm intrigued, do you think it would work sort of having that premium that Cannon actually mentioned, how there was the success with the organic premium? Do we think that would work to engage consumers? Luke, do you want to come in there?
That's very good. Yeah, someone else.
Or Josette?
Yeah, I'll defer to Josette first, and then I'll hop in. Sure, happy to.
I'll just say, one of the visions of regenerative agriculture and more ecological farming practices in general is that we're going to sort of shift that balance of food production and environmental benefits to have more environmental benefits than we've had in the past. And when you think of almost every environmental issue, you really only get to the goal by going to scale. So if you're looking to create habitat for biodiversity, you can't have bespoke, really awesome, tiny habitats, that are a few on the landscape, and you're somehow expecting the species to find all those really awesome single locations. Or if you're trying to address climate resilience or climate mitigation, water use, all of these natural resource issues, you really can only get to the goal at scale. And I think there's an important role for certifications and MMRV and those sorts of things for the early adopters, the people who are taking maybe more risk because they're figuring things out at a time and they don't have all the pieces necessarily in front of them. And so those certifications can play a really important role there. But if you think about the number of growers that you're trying to impact, those systems aren't going to work for everybody. Not everyone's really going to put in the time and the energy. That the certifications always require a certain amount of sunk cost and time to do the monitoring, to do the paperwork, to get the third-party reviews and so forth. And that's not going to work for every grower. So I think it's really important we also think about how we're trying to move the big part of the bell-shaped curve, and certifications probably aren't going to be the right tool for all of them. So that's where we have to look for where can we show there is an actual benefit, a return on investment to the grower? How can we, help our supply chains provide different types of rewards that aren't just based on a narrow certification and MMRV type system? That's when we're going to get to the scale that will hopefully achieve our goals.
Yeah,
And it's
Ellen,
hard. Don't have all
yeah.
the right answers, but I think we're going to be turning a lot of dials a little bit rather than relying on this one dial of certification. It has an important role to play, particularly for the early adopters, but maybe doesn't get us to the scale that we ultimately want to achieve.
Yep. Josette, I think just to build on what you've shared, McDonald's is a very outcome-driven organization, and we're science-led, outcome-based. But I think in the case of at the scale of agriculture and the breadth and depth of agriculture and the variability within agriculture really complexifies that. And so, although we want to de-risk the transition in the short term and make sure that farmers, ranchers, producers, and growers have the resources that they need to continue operating at at a profitable and viable level. In the long term, we want that we want the food system, we want food production to continue to be self-propelled, and regenerative agriculture is certainly those principles behind it are certainly a way to do that. So similar to what Josette said, I think our desire to measure outcomes and to quantify benefits or co-benefits or ecosystem services to an nth degree can sometimes be a huge headwind or barrier to scale. And I think it's a warning for all of us who want to know, okay, if we're investing in this, what are we getting back? We need to lean into the fact that although there is some variability due to weather and soil types and other uncontrollable variables within food production and agriculture, the impact of regenerative principles are fairly predictable and predictive. And so we can lean into that to know what the outcomes are going to be long term. It may vary short term what sequestration looks like, or water optimization and absorption looks like, or how that soil biome is built in one year over another. But we need to, I think, become more comfortable with releasing ourselves from making every farm or ranch an academic exercise. And in doing so, in releasing ourselves from wanting to quantify every outcome on every operation, for those of us who are in that role, we enable scale to a much larger degree. But while still focusing, like I said, on de-risking that transition where needed.
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke. So much to come back to, but I do want to make sure we get to our audience questions. There's a question for Canon here. How do you expect your customers to support farmers in implementing regen ag practices? Do you have any examples you can share, financial or non-financial?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, it's sort of, I wanted to come back to what Jeff was talking about a little bit about the people in the middle, because I think I think what has to happen is really the brands have to commit that this is something they want as part of their supply chain. Because if you think about the middle, we've conditioned the buyers of or any even brands buyers to buy things for the lowest price possible. They're rewarded by getting things for less than a penny than their competitor has. So the idea that you're going to reprogram this whole culture of so a cotton mill partner in the middle, they're going to want to make sure that they buy at the market price or less. And so to try to retrain all these people is almost impossible. So I think the brand has to commit. What we've seen success for us is we've seen brands that say, this is a value to us. We're going to commit a pot of money to this as an endeavor to clean up our supply chain. There may be ancillary carbon benefits. There can be this lack of, reputational risk, goes down. A lot of these different, benefits that accrue to the brand itself. and say, look, that's a value. We're going to assign money there. We're not going to put it on the shoulders of the buying community to try to deal with it. They'll identify who they bought the product from, like the farm they source from, and then there can be a part that comes alongside either to support practices or actually like a per unit incentive to the farmer that they, you know, if they source from that farmer that's been identified as best in class or regenerative or whatever the goal is. So I think there's some of these ways that we can, like, I don't know that necessarily you're going to retrain the consumer at this point. I still think regenerative is the right thing to do. It speaks to a lot of the things that are values for people. But again, I think it's incumbent upon brands at this point to sort of take the lead. It's like that, if you build it, they will come thing. Like we have to get started. There's a lot of great farms out there doing great things. But I think we can't just, you know, be identifying great farmers and then just say like, okay, the middle needs to figure out how to, you know, reward them somehow. I mean, I think there's got to be a brand commitment, and I think there's tangible value for the brands that do commit and clean up the supply chain. There's efficiencies that also can be gained from eliminating some of the middle folks that aren't maybe, you know, in cotton, there's a lot of agents and other people that get in the middle of things. So there's a lot of reasons why we need to think about it, but I do think it needs to be, you know, brand led at this point in terms of identifying that stream of value.
Thanks, Canon. So yeah, seeing the sort of value within it being brand led, and then also the importance of cleaning up your supply chain, as you say, which ties in very well with the most popular question, which is about the challenge of traceability at scale to specific farms, how different contexts can impact that, different geographies. Jeff, would you like to speak on that one?
No. I'd love to, because traceability is one of those things that crosses all of our industries and all the different commodities. And we do have to figure it out. This is again where I think I'm going to keep coming back to like collaboration and having to work together, because we think about a beef carcass, and guess who wants traceability for that? McDonald's wants traceability for the parts they take. The, you know, steakhouse one and grocer wants traceability for the primal cuts they take. The pet food manufacturer wants traceability for the gelatin and bone meal that they take. And the car manufacturers and leather goods industries want traceability for the hides that are coming off of that, and then go on for, you know, all the whatever it is, Luke, 270 different commodities that a beef carcass supplies. They all want that. But right now we're all approaching it with our special snowflake syndrome, and this is the, you know, traceability provider that we've selected, and for these reasons, and they ask for it in one way. McDonald's has a traceability provider for something, they ask for it in a different way, because we're so excited about our dashboards and how they display, and it's going to be so great to talk to leadership. We need to be able to narrow those things down again to give, I mean, that's part of, again, visiting our suppliers last week. They're showing us all these different traceability platforms that all the different fashion brands are asking them to use and put information in, because we're trying to map supply chains. And, you know, you've got to do that mapping, tracing, and tracking is what we're all trying to get to. And to talk about incentives and how you'll reward farmers, the whole supply chain back. And I like to think of, I mean, premium is always a terrifying word. Financial reward is a little bit more palatable for people to at our end of the value chain to take on. And there's ways then, but we just having the first level of like we're not able to do those words, or as Cannon said, like indicate those desires that we have and see how it flows back, because there's also a real challenge. Take the beef carcass again too, is it McDonald's? So McDonald's has very clear principles, goals, things. So do they have to deliver all the financial reward to the rancher for the stuff, but then the pet food company, the leather manufacturer, the steakhouse, everybody else gets the same benefit from that investment that McDonald's made in doing it? Somehow the industry has to work together and again have those common definitions, common incentive structures, common MMRV structures, and flow that through. And it's not just at the farm, it's go to the processors. We're all going with different audits that are asking 97%. So we at the same question. So you've got teams now that have to be at these processors to go, Walmart is in today, Canada Goose is in tomorrow, McDonald's is in the next day, different auditors with, again, our special snowflake syndrome of our audit is special because, and we're asking it instead of simplifying all these things, and that helps take cost out of that. But we all have to like come together, which again is what I'm hoping like starting these conversations will help us do. But at some point, we're going to have to take the leap and try things and say, guess what? Jeff thought this was going to be a great idea. Turns out it's a disaster, or turns out it was a really good idea. But we're going to have to take that leap because I think we keep edging up to the thing and then being like, yeah, but we really like the way we do it and we understand it and we invested all this money in it. So eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Ties back in with what we said at the beginning about that common ground. And yeah, willing to take a risk, as you say, to progress over perfection. Gisette, I wonder if I could turn to you now and ask, how are you integrating water conservation and water quality impacts into your regen approaches?
Yeah, well, obviously water is very important in a dry climate, well, or Mediterranean climate like we have here in California, as Cannon said. So we have a pretty comprehensive approach to water. So we have quite a lot of research that delivers grower tools to improve the precision of their water management. Someone asked a question earlier on the chat about how we collaborate with other commodities. So we have an example we learned from the wine grape industry of using a satellite-based imagery together with a suite of 6 different models that we've calibrated for almonds to allow growers to have sort of real-time, very high-resolution information on the water needs of all the trees in their orchard. And hopefully technology will allow us to then deliver just the right amount of water at the right time to each of those trees. So that's kind of the vision over time. So a lot of research, we do a lot of grower outreach. We have what we call the irrigation continuum, which sort of meets a grower with where they are now in terms of their water management and ladders them up to more and more precise technologies that are conservation oriented. But probably the biggest thing that we do in almonds is we have been working with a conservation-based organization to promote groundwater recharge. So most of you viewers out there always think of California as a drought-prone part of the country, but we are equally flood-prone in California. And we have the opportunity when we have abundant precipitation in the winter months, which is the only time we have precipitation in most of California. So if we have a lot of rainfall, if we have a lot of snow melt, we can take that excess water, which would be released from our reservoirs for flood control, and instead of allowing it to just go out to the ocean, we can spread it over farms like almond orchards in the wintertime and use that to recharge our groundwater supply. So California farming communities rely sort of an equal measure with surface water that comes through irrigation canals as they do on groundwater that they can pump to supplement the surface water in dry years. So the groundwater is really our bank account for the long term. And using groundwater recharge by flooding orchards in the wintertime when there is abundant water available, not every year, but many years, using that to recharge the groundwater is in many ways banking water for the future, and not just for farms, but for communities and other water users. Most of rural California relies on groundwater for their drinking water. My town, which is not that small, we rely on groundwater for drinking water. So it's a way to be part of a community-based solution, is to use our farms for recharge to help improve the groundwater basin that helps multiple users. And this has become all the more important because we have now regulations on a groundwater basis that requires all those water users to collaborate and to figure out how they're going to achieve sustainable water management. And that is a regulation that all water users, including data centers, there's a question about that, are all required to participate in that process. And it regulates how much water individual users get if the basin is getting out of sustainable management. So,
Cannon, I wonder if you would like to comment there about water regulations within California and how water conservation is looking on your farm.
Yeah, we've invested heavily in water conservation over the years, just as, like Josette said, we're in a climate where water can be a challenge, either too much or too little. But certainly, investing in the way we apply water is really important, but also how our soils can retain moisture. And I think that's the part of the regenerative style of practices where we're building resilience into the soil so it can last a little bit longer. The water that we put in, our farm's invested 80% of the farm is in drip irrigation. All that power demand is offset by solar energy that we've invested in. So, our investment and our commitment is very strong. And I think the regenerative practices that can build and kind of retain the moisture are really important and lead to better yield and quality outcomes as well. So I think you want to make sure you're conserving water, but we also have to produce. We had a conversation a little bit about affordability. The farmers that are able to produce the magnitude of, food that we had, coming out of the ground is amazing. And so, again, you've got to also remember that yield is really important. We've had some regenerative pilots where people came in with ideas from other areas that had worked in other areas. And, in one example, we had a group farms right alongside our farming on cotton. We split the field and they got to bring their own contractors. We farmed our method. They got a bale per acre. We got 4 bales per acre, same year, same conditions, same field, same soil. So I think that's another aspect that you got to just be careful. Like, people feel like there's this panacea that, like, these practices are somehow going to, show these farmers how to do things again. But again, we can do better and we continue to push ourselves to do better. But again, we're very place-based. We know our soils. We know the things we need to do. If you try to bring in new practices, or also very risky for farmers to undertake, because we have weather, we have pests, we have price risk. As you start doing really big practice changes, that also introduce a whole nother layer of risk. So I don't want to continue to expand, but anyway, a little bit of additional context from the farm side. But
Brilliant, thank you. Circling back to a point already made about certification, are there any certifications that are coming into the industry that could help with product claims? I wonder, Luke, would you like to take that, or Jeff?
I think right now, Ellen, we're not focused on the claim side of regenerative principles. For McDonald's, it's really about long-term farm level resiliency. And so if the sort of far-flung and disparate parts of our food system, of which we're all a component of, want to get together and look at something like that, it may be of interest. But right now, we need to understand more about what the consumer relevance is to a claim. Does it introduce cost? Does it introduce complexity, like we talked about, for farmers and producers, with the need for certification? So right now, this is really about resiliency and about the food system, and it's about the women and men who raise and grow the food. And and especially in my organization, we have a huge, and it was great, hearing Jeff lean into his McDonald's and Mars experience, and he and I have had some wonderful conversations over the last 8 or 9 years that we've been connected. And a lot of that is about the depth of our supply chain and the complexity of it. But at the front of that supply chain are farmers and ranchers and producers and growers. And so whatever we do has to work for them. And they are, without a doubt, our success is intrinsically tied to their success. And so whatever we do has to work for all parts of the supply chain, but especially for those who are raising and growing our food. So if things tend to move that way, it may be something that, as an industry, or as a kind of those of us involved in food production, agriculture, and food systems, that we want to look at. Great, but right now that's not our motivator. And it's fine if it is for other people, but it's really about having accessible, affordable food for the future.
Absolutely. We've got a question here for Jeff from Andrew, which is how can industry move beyond the current siloed approach between the food and fibre sectors?
Great question. And I was hoping we get to that answer. I think like some of the things I've already said, the biggest thing is going to be having these dialogues and really pushing ourselves to try things and say, in this one overlapping part of the supply chain, what could we try? Or with this one group of mixed producers like Cannon's operation, where there's different things, where there's food and fibers coming out of that, how could we try some things here and use that and then expand it out? And I think one thing to think about with this too is it's not true for every commodity and it's not true for every geography either, but there's often an 80-20 rule in agriculture where 20% of the producers are growing or raising 80% of the commodity. And so I think one of the hopeful things for Regen Ag and any of the stuff that we're trying to do is we don't have to boil the ocean and get, whatever it is, Luke, 160 million zillion like beef producers in the world to do it. You need to find the ones that are managing the biggest herds and make the change there. And it will either then trickle down to the other ones, or not that it doesn't matter, but it won't matter in the commodity side of the scale of the business where people are doing it. So that's where I think we can work together and get out of that silo. And again, find areas where not only just we overlap, but where we overlap in significant volumes where it would be a material impact to do something positive here. And then where we can get out of the silos, come together around minimizing some of the things. And I love, McDonald's approach of being like, we're not saying it has to be A, B, C, D, E, F, or else we won't give it a stamp of approval for this. It's context-based, it's all those things. And I think we're getting a little sometimes there's too many things you can focus on and too many things to do, and we want them all. Like what positive attribute do you not want as a brand to say you have? But we need to get a little bit more comfortable with focusing on fewer things and doing them better. So if soil health is the most important thing to us, let's really lean into that. And maybe a couple of the other things we I don't want to say deprioritize, but we don't worry as the same, or maybe that's part of where the industries come together on a couple of things in Regen Ag that can really drive impact at a material level.
Absolutely. So realigning on priorities going forward. Conscious of time, I'd really love if we could just go around the room and express our key takeaway from this conversation that we'd like to leave the audience with. Cannon, could I start with you, please?
Yeah, I'll go as quickly as I can. I think one takeaway is that, I think with regenerative, it may not be as important to have a certification. I think like organic, it's essential, but I think with regenerative, it's really about that farmer to brand connection and figuring out how to build those kind of supply chain connections more durably first, and then see about, all the certifications and other things that might come later. The consumer is going to be confused probably by another sticker on a, thing anyway. So anyway, that's just a quick takeaway.
Very quick. I appreciate it. Thank you. Gisette, I'll turn to you now, please.
Yeah, again, I think if we're really looking for transformation of scale, we want to see our food system transform. We need to be a little less bespoke and a little less trying to own our own piece of it, because there is no single piece for any of us. It's such an integrated system. Even I think of in almonds, we feed the almond hulls, the outer coating of our almond, to the dairy cows in California who end up being hamburgers for McDonald's at some point in time. We turn over cows' good, so it's good meat as I understand it. So it's really a very integrated system, and we have to find solutions that help us give confidence and credibility to any claims, but aren't, as you say, are each sort of snowflake versions of what that looks like.
Confidence and credibility. Luke?
Yeah, Ellen, I find myself just kind of repeating what some of the things I've said before, but it has to work. We have to come together and continue conversations like this. I think I have found this incredibly valuable. I love the questions. I love interacting with Jeff and Josette and Cannon and yourself. But at the end of the day, it has to work for the people raising and growing our food, like I said a few minutes ago. And if we can't make it work, if we can't work together, align on expectations and align on asks, and supplement some resources and then find funding mechanisms or de-risking mechanisms. If it doesn't work for a growing number of producers and growers, then it's never going to get to scale, as Josette mentioned. You know, the success of the impact to the food system will be found at scale, and so that's how we're going to reach our full potential.
Absolutely, collaboration and alignment. And finally, Jeff.
Yeah, I think I'd just leave on a positive note to say that I think you can tell from this dialogue I don't think there are really any aspects of this where people are like, I don't really align with that. I don't think that's how we would get there. I think we've all been doing this, and I mean, like we all as like these industries and big companies and producer groups and stuff know these things. We're all agreed that these are like the ways to do it. As I've been saying a few times, it's just we've got to figure out how to take some leaps now because we're kind of all having these nice dialogues at the edge. But no one's I'm not grabbing Luke's hand yet and jumping off yet. So, and that's what we've got to do. And learn if we don't fail, we're not pushing it hard enough. So we've got to accept that we're going to try some things and they're going to fail. And hopefully more of them will be successes than failures. And that'll be the definition of success.
Absolutely, taking the leap. Well, we're a little bit over time. I want to say sorry to those that we didn't get to answer your questions. It just goes to show how much needed this conversation was. To echo everyone's points here, we really need to keep having these conversations. So we'll definitely be in touch with another webinar in a similar format. Thank you so much to all of the audience for your questions and to the fantastic panel. I've really, really enjoyed it, and thank you so much for your time. We'll be in touch soon with the recordings as well. And if you would like to host a webinar with Innovation Forum, do reach out to us. But now I've been Ellen here. Thank you for watching and goodbye.